you can get away without missing out. Whether you're traveling across Idaho or just spending more time outside, the Connector keeps you up to date with the local stories that matter, from wildfire season to community news. Stay connected to Idaho with the Connector, Idaho Daily News. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudette. What if your dream of living in the world of Jane Austen actually came true? And instead of social media and dating apps, there were ballroom dances, strict manners, and a very different set of rules for falling in love. Well, that is the premise behind Sometime This Century, which is the latest novel from Idaho author Samantha Silva. The story follows Annabelle. She's a romance writer who has always felt out of place in her own time until she suddenly wakes up in Regency England, inside the very world that she has spent her life imagining. So joining us now to talk more about this latest novel is the author herself. Samantha, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me, Gemma. It's nice to be here.
Okay, so for folks who haven't picked up a copy of the book quite yet, tell us a little bit more about this story.
Well, it has an unusual history because it began life as a screenplay 25 years ago that I sold to Universal Studios. And it was not that long after the very beloved BBC series of Pride and Prejudice that sort of, made Jane Austen once again explode into the universe, and everyone hungered for more. And so I had this idea about a young woman who really longed to be in that world and felt she was more of that world than this one, which so many people did and still do who love Jane Austen and love the Regency era. And what would happen if she actually got what she wished for? That was the genesis of the idea. And then I just had a lot of fun riffing off the novels. Both Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility are sort of templates in a way in terms of characters and setting and incident. And I had a great deal of fun riffing off of that. And the Universal at the time, 25 years ago, did not make the movie, but I ended up with the novel rights, which I sat on for years, and then finally decided, well, it's time. I'm going to adapt my own screenplay as a novel. And HarperCollins snapped it up. So here we are.
So where did the inspiration for the entire story come from? I mean, yes, Jane Austen and that era, but what made you think about someone who just didn't feel like she quite belonged in the time she's living in?
I think that the love of Jane Austen and Regency England, sort of the longing for that kind of civility and gentleness in a way, and a set of rules that are more understandable, has been very attractive to readers for a long time. And I think it's in part because our world is so chaotic and unknowable and sometimes so uncivil that we do long for what we think the Regency era is and was. And so I like the idea very much of a character being tested and to see what they choose and how their choices really remake their own trajectory in the world. And so I'm really interested in, particularly because I cut my teeth as a screenwriter, I'm very interested in this idea of putting a character under pressure and seeing what happens to them. And so this young woman who has this fantasy about the world of Jane Austen, I thought, well, how better to put her under pressure than actually put her in that world and see what she makes of it.
So I think one of the best parts of this novel is watching these modern characters try to navigate a world without things like, Wi-Fi, right? Or phones or those contemporary freedoms, which I'm curious about which modern convenience or maybe kind of an assumption did you enjoy, like writing about the most, or maybe, taking away from Annabelle?
Well, it's probably less Annabelle, who did dream of the world and actually knows quite a bit
Uh-huh.
about how to operate in the world, than her companions, her sister Cassie, who's an influencer with the travel vlog, and her
Yeah.
sort of sidekick, ex-boyfriend sidekick Billy, and they're very modern creatures, and much more adept at using technology and sort of operating and navigating the world we live in now. So where it comes more naturally to Annabelle, they are really the fish out of water in this situation. And it was a lot of fun to see how they kind of were forced to slow down without technology and without being able to say the first thing that popped into their head, with having to really think about consequences, that everything they said, everything they did, every choice they made was consequential. And that was really a lot of fun. And I think what happens to them, they both grow a lot through the experience because they don't have the usual things to rely on. They have to sort of rely on their wits and their own sense and sensibility, as it were, and figure out who they are in this particular world, the Regency world, which is actually who they are, but without all the accoutrements of the
Mm.
modern world.
What's interesting to me is that, Jane's Austen influence, I mean, not only is it woven throughout this latest novel of yours, what is it about Austen's work, do you think, that continues to resonate, right, with modern readers? I mean, it seems like every time we look, there's a new adaptation of a Jane Austen story.
Yes, in fact, there's a new Sense and Sensibility coming up that
Yeah.
everyone's very, very excited about. I it's so hard to know, and of course, I also love Charles Dickens, and the same question could be asked of Dickens, but Jane Austen, I think, has a particular resonance, and frankly, a particular resonance with women, who who I think again long for a world in its most romantic sense, like forget for a moment about the constraints of the world for women, which are severe and extreme. But there's something about the world that Jane Austen writes of where people do understand the rules of the world and how they are expected to be, but also how they can be within those constraints and develop as human beings, how everyone all the characters can or not develop as human beings. Some people falter under those constraints or become oppressed by them, and some people grow and become more who they are under the constraints. I mean, for instance, I think Elizabeth Bennet is such an important character because she does live in a world of constraints, and she is a woman who speaks her
Hmm.
mind and believes fervently in what she believes and behaves the way she wants to behave. And she does, in the end, have to confront her own prejudices and her own pride. And just as in Sense and Sensibility, Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood are really, I think, sort of set up as demure and brat, which is I think the common the contemporary iteration of Sense and
Hmm.
Sensibility. And in my story, Annabelle's more demure and Cassie's more brat. But in the end, as in Sense and Sensibility, the sisters learn from each other and they understand the value of both of those things, so that it's not an either or choice. You don't need to choose only rationalism and restraint. You can also choose emotion and emotional intelligence, sensitivity. And so I think Jane Austen actually is doing that as well. I mean, I think in the end of Sense and Sensibility, the sisters, Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, learn from each other and become more like the other one because they've seen the other one suffer because of who she is and how she has had to operate under the constraints of the world. So I think Jane Austen is, her idea was, I simply draw a circumference around a few country villages and think I can find all of humanity there. And that's exactly what she did. She had a very small sort of canvas, but she wrote about
Hmm.
all of humanity within that canvas. And I think that that's one of the reasons we keep coming back to her, because we see ourselves then and now, And I mean, forget about how brilliant and witty and, just what a marvelous writer she is. I think those people still feel alive to us and still feel like what we struggle with now. The feelings of being a woman, I don't think have changed. Really, it still feels like what it feels like to be a woman. But
Hmm.
that's a society where you're having to operate under very different constraints. And so being put under that kind of pressure, you do grow in ways that maybe we aren't forced to in the same way now.
I want to talk a little bit more about the relationship between Annabelle and Cassie because it really felt like such an important relationship in the book. I mean, really just as important as that romance itself. Why was it important to you to really, I mean, in a way, tell a love story that is also about that sibling relationship, right? Because frankly, I think sometimes we focus so much on a romantic love when we realize there's so many other deep loves that we may be blessed to have in our life, even if they're complicated ones.
Yes, I agree. And honestly, I was very lucky because my editor through HarperCollins, when we were in the process of, beginning revisions on the book, I had thought it was much more like Pride and Prejudice because Pride and Prejudice is sort of the model for, the balls and the Deversey, the Henry Layton Deversey character who is her love interest. I was really playing on those tropes and, the Bennett family, et cetera, et cetera. But my editor said, I think you need to center the sisters sooner so that we really set up that relationship before they get thrust into this Regency world. And once I started doing that, I realized how much my own book had in common with Sense and Sensibility, even
Mm.
more than Pride and Prejudice. I think, lots of Jane Austen lovers will recognize a lot of the characters from both novels in mine. It really it really showed me an opportunity to mine that relationship for more depth, more richness. And I really had fun developing that relationship. I mean, I always knew in a way that because Cassie was very successful in the modern world and Annabelle was seen as a kind of bookish, introverted nerd who didn't really fit in, that their status would be flipped in the Regency world. But Cassie is really at sea when that happens to her. I mean, she's an influencer with a streaming deal in the works for her travel vlog. And she's on top of the world and she can wear whatever clothes she wants and say whatever she wants. And suddenly none of that is true. In fact, she can say a thing that will ruin her and ruin her reputation. And but seeing for Annabelle, seeing the way that Cassie is true to herself, who is her most authentic self, really wakes up in Annabelle this understanding of how important that is to be authentic, to be true to oneself. And it's really through that relationship that she begins to question, can I be who I am in this world? Because I can't be a writer in this world. And how important is that to me? Am I willing to give that
Mm.
up for love? Am I willing to live my love story and not write it? And I think, especially for me as a writer, that's a very, very personal question and really important question. And so, it was really through the sister relationship that I was able to develop that as an idea and a theme. And I think I love the way it pays off. I love the sister relationship and, the way in which they do really learn from each other. And finally, after a lifetime of not being close at all, find a way to be really genuinely close to each other and love each other in a way they never have.
Before I let you go, what do you hope folks take away when they finish reading this book and put it down?
Well, keep in mind that it is a time travel rom-com, set in the Regency. England. So, that
I love that
that that
idea.
Yeah, that is what it is. And it's, already the book's been in the world now for a few weeks. And, I'm hearing people are reaching out to me. I'm reading your book now. I'm loving it. I'm laughing out loud. It's so delightful. And men and women, I've really, it's really been interesting to me how many men are reading it as well. But I think that it's a story that's meant to be uplifting and fun and delightful and charming, and I think we need that. I think the world is very hard right now and hardened, and we need the soft places, and we need the delight, and we need the charm, and we need to think about who we are and who we want to be and what does it mean to be true to ourselves in this moment, in our particular moment. And so, mostly I hope that people have fun with it. I think that the Jane Austen lovers will get lots of side winks and understand all the references. But mostly I hope that people fall in love with the characters and love them as much as I do.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. We've been speaking with Samantha Silva. She is an Idaho-based author about her new novel, Sometime This Century. It is out now. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Idaho Matters. And for quick news of the day, start your mornings with our podcast. It's called The Connector, Idaho Daily News. Just by listening, you're helping to support public radio right here in Idaho. And I want to say a big thank you for that.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.